Hello, I'm Corinna Howard and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello, welcome to episode 113, I believe, of the Monday Night Review. I hope you are all well. It is my last day of being 30, in my 30s. I wish it was my last day of being 30, although I'd still have loads of babies to have, so maybe not. I'm not too worried about being 40, but I got quite used to being my 30s. But I was thinking a couple of months ago, the 30s for me was like the trenches of babies. So who knows what the 40s will bring. There wasn't an episode last week. I did do one episode for the Patreon. So if you are a member of the Patreon, you'll have got a little extra. Well, it wasn't an extra. It's the weekly episode you deserve. But I didn't have time to do one for everyone and one for the Patreon. So the Patreon won. They got a nice Victorian romp, a classic. One of the things I wanted to do with this podcast, although it's so tempting to do, I mean, America, it's just like a hotbed of crime, isn't it? But I did really want to also focus on some of the lesser known British ones. And I've got another one for you today. I will absolutely be cracking on with the standard American big hitters and also some paranormal. I got a shed load of books. I do this in a lot of summers, basically, as a treat to myself. I have a Kindle. I try and read as much on my Kindle as possible. There's only so many books my house can hold. But I have a phenomenally long Amazon wish list. I don't love buying from Amazon, but I have a list there because they do a very good list. They're very good for doing lists. But what I do is every now and again, I go through, I have a cull. When I worked in an office, my wish list was about 200 pages long. But I go through, I have a cull, I put, stuff that I may want, I put in a hidden wish list. But anyway, I will go through and any of the books on my wish list that I can get for less than something like £3, that's including postage, I buy. So I get this kind of stack of secondhand books. I try and buy all my books secondhand unless they're for gifts. And I did this the other day, but I did it. There was a book I was looking for research for this podcast. And it was something ridiculous, like £38 secondhand on Amazon and eBay. But then I tracked it down on World of Books. And so I thought, they had an offer on. So I did my secondhand bookshop there. And I think I got about 8 books for 25 quid, which is not bad. They were all true crime or spooky related. And it's then very difficult when your kids are around to, if I'm trying to research this podcast, it's going to be something spooky. It's going to be something creepy or, just not really suitable for small children. So it makes it really difficult to research when they're around. And I don't really like reading about it at night. And also, God, I'm really bad. If I start a book, I have to finish it. And I'm really enjoying I'm reading a biography of Louis Armstrong and I love it. I'm really enjoying it. But you could kill someone with it if you hit them on the head with it. It's whopper. I'm over halfway through, but that's what I'm reading in bed at the moment. And until I finished it, I cannot deviate. But I also want to give a shout out. I got one of the people who I saw last weekend, one of the family friends of my husband's. He gave me the suggestion for the Delaware chicken story, which I can't remember if I did as a full episode or as a Patreon. I think I did it as a Patreon episode. But then when I saw him this time, he recommended a podcast to me called Bear Creek. So if you like true crime podcasts, check it out. It's called Bear Creek. There have been 2 seasons. Season 1 is the one that he recommended to me. It's the one I'm listening to and I'm really enjoying it. I think I'm on episode 4. I love, most of the podcasts I listen to are episodic. So like me, they'll cover usually one story in one episode or 2 parts. But every now and again, I quite like a series. And obviously everyone went bonkers for Serial. My all-time favourite podcast that I've ever listened to that was a series was Dirty John. Absolutely fantastic. And this is another one of those. So if you like something that's a bit of a longer story, then check out Bear Creek. Now let's get into it. Today's episode, it's definitely British, but it's not technically on British soil. We are going to be talking about the Porthole Murder. In October 1947, the MV Durban Castle was making her usual journey from South Africa to London. I say London with bunny ears because it says London, but technically, obviously, it's Southampton. Well, not obviously, but you don't get these liners going straight into London. She'd been back in service since July, having been refurbished after use during the war, and had set sail on the 10th of October. On board was 21-year-old actress Eileen Isabella Ronnie Gibson, known professionally as Gay Gibson. She'd been on a theatre tour of South Africa, playing the lead in The Man with a Load of Mischief, and was returning to London to perform in a theatre in the West End. She would be staying in a first-class cabin on B deck, cabin 126. On the night of the 17th of October, so 7 nights in, after spending the evening dancing, Gibson was walked to her cabin by two of her friends at about 11:30 p.m. At 1 a.m, the night watchman, James Murray, saw her leaning against the rail of a deck, on the top deck, main deck, smoking a cigarette, still wearing the black evening dress she'd had on earlier in the evening. And Murray told her that they were about to clean the deck and she'd get wet. So she said, "Oh, it's really hot in my cabin, but I guess I'll return down there." I can imagine it being very 40s polite, which is basically like, you have to get off the deck, we're going to clean it. And she's like, "I don't want to fucking get off the deck, but I'm going to because I'm a polite lady." The cabins had two lights outside them, one red and one green. The red would show if the button was pressed requesting a steward, so if you needed a man, if you needed someone to carry your suitcases. And the green light would show if you needed a stewardess, so if you had a more feminine problem, you could request a woman to come and respond. At 3 a.m, or just before 3 a.m, the bell for cabin 126 rang several times in the night watchman's cabin, and Murray sent his deputy, Frederick Steer, to see what was going on, and Steer noted that both lights were on outside the cabin, the green and the red, and this is unusual. He knocks on the door and it's partially opened, and though Steer tries to enter, but then the door gets pushed shut and the man says through the grill, so I guess you've got a little hatch that you can open and close, or you can see who's outside, and he says it's all right, and he shuts the door. Steer isn't too suspicious. He returns to the watchman's cabin, and then they go back down. Steer and Murray go back down to cabin 126, and they stand outside listening at the door for a while. They can't hear anything. The lights have gone off. They just assume that the lady in 126 must have been entertaining a man, and the buttons had been pressed by accident. It's funny that it's both buttons, but we can assume that they're near each other, so maybe they thought in the rambunctiousness of the evening, both buttons had been inadvertently pressed. At 7:30 the next morning, when the ship was about 150 miles off the coast of Africa, the stewardess, Eileen Field, knocks on the door of cabin 126 and doesn't get a response. So she goes in, she finds the room empty, the sheets stained, and the porthole open. At first she thought Gibson had gone to the bathroom, but it wasn't until later that she went back and the room was exactly as she'd left it, and she reports Gibson missing. A thorough search is made of the boat. There's no sign of Gay Gibson, and it was feared that she had somehow fallen overboard. Despite the unlikelihood of finding her alive or dead in the vast shark-infested waters, the captain, Captain Patey, had the ship turn around and retrace their steps. Whilst he was doing this, the news that Gay Gibson was missing reached the night watchman, and they went straight to the captain, because when they had visited in response to the bells being rung, they had recognised the man who had opened the door, and that man was deck steward James Cam. Initially, they assumed that somehow he'd responded to the red light outside Gibson's cabin before them, but when she was reported missing, they weren't so sure. And Captain Patey then messages ahead to Southampton to notify the police, who instruct the captain to seal the cabin until they reach Southampton. Now, 31-year-old James Cann was a self-assured ex-soldier with a Lancashire accent, a high shine to his black hair. He sort of wanted to look like the Latino lovers that were popular in the films at the time. Shipmates called him Don Jimmy. Though he was a married man, he had boasted of his conquests, supposedly a woman on every voyage. 2 girls had accused him of rape, and he told his colleagues that he was on a mission to sleep with a passenger on that voyage. Cam had already noticed Gay Gibson and had even been reprimanded by a senior officer for talking to her near the first-class cabins on B deck. Initially, Cam denied being anywhere near Gibson's cabin, but raised suspicions when he wore long sleeve shirts instead of the customary short sleeves. And then when he was asked to roll his sleeves up, he revealed deep scratches that he initially explained when he was examined by the ship's doctor that he said they were inflicted by a rough towel or they were a tropical rash, but the doctor confirmed that the scratches were consistent with a struggle, and from then on Cam was held in his cabin. When the boat arrived at Southampton, the police were waiting, both local and from Scotland Yard, which was customary. Southampton police would have been a very small police force. And this was obviously a big deal murder inquiry because it took place on open seas. And so Scotland Yard were there, and Cam was taken into custody where he changed his story. He said that he and Gibson had been engaged in consensual sex, after which she had suffered from a sudden fit and then died. He tried to revive her, but when he could not, he panicked and pushed her lifeless body through the porthole. It wouldn't be the last time his story changed, and James Cam was formally charged with the murder of Gay Gibson, and his trial date set for the 10th of March 1948. When the trial came round, an array of exhibits lay in front of the jury, including a replica made up of cabin 126, and the cabin linen there was the cabin linen from Gay Gibson's room, smeared with Gibson's blood and saliva. The fact that Cam had been accused of attempting to rape 3 women on previous voyages was kept from the trial, having been deemed inadmissible, which I think was pretty bizarre. The prosecution insisted that Cam had invented the story of being invited into the cabin. They believed that he arrived at the actress's door under the pretext of delivering a drink to her, and once she opened the door, he forced his way inside and tried to rape her. She fought back furiously, scratching his arms and wrists, and he strangled her. Somehow, during the struggle, Gibson managed to press the service buttons, and this brought steer to cabin 126, and by the time he arrived, Cam had just finished murdering the actress. Several witnesses took the stand. Some testified that Gibson was unwell, and they believed that she did have a heart condition, and she would have what she would call turns that sometimes involved the obvious signs of a fit and would involve her lips turning blue. Others told that she was given to inexplicable bouts of hysteria and fainting, and that some said that she had told them she was pregnant, and others testified that she'd accepted her fare home and £350 from a not very well thought of nightclub owner. Of course, Gibson's moral conduct was called into question by the defence, and they called to the witness stand Dr. Ina Schub, who was the wife of an actor-producer that Gibson knew, but she'd also seen Gibson in a professional capacity and described her as neurotic and sexually active. Obviously, for a woman in 1948, this is very badly thought of. On the flip side, one of the stewards testified that Cam had observed Gibson dancing and had said to him, quote, "I have half a mind to take a drink to her cabin tonight." So we know that Gibson was in Cam's sights. What we don't know is whether she was open to this advance or not. And by the sounds of it, we'll find out that she was not. Interestingly, her parents also spoke at the trial and said that she was in fine health. So there is one load of people who say that she had this heart condition. They'd seen the effects of the heart condition. She was not well. Her lips had turned blue, which showed, poor circulation. But then you have her parents saying she was absolutely fine. And a professional doctor who said, she did have medical conditions. She had asthma, but never mentioned the heart condition. When Cam took to the stand, he was confident. He was sort of assuming that everything would go his way. But under questioning, it became apparent that he'd changed his story at least 6 times, seemingly to try and get himself out of trouble. He said that Gay Gibson had invited him to her cabin that night and that he'd bought her a drink. She was wearing a nightgown with nothing on beneath it. She removed this on his arrival and he climbed into bed with her. He said they had consensual sex and that suddenly her body stiffened and then went limp. He got out of bed and saw that she was foaming brownish froth from the mouth and that only one eye appeared to be slightly open, and he tried to resuscitate her, but there were no signs of life. He was unable to explain why he did not call for help if she died of natural causes, as he claimed, and then why he'd chosen to dispose of the body by pushing her out of the porthole rather than kind of leaving and making it look like natural causes. He confirmed that he did not press the buttons and he didn't notice her doing so. The prosecuting barrister said of the disposal of the body through the porthole, quote, "Don't you think that was curious conduct from a truthful person?" "I should say it's beastly conduct," Cam admitted. The most damning evidence against Cam was the series of lies he told to the police, the captain of the boat, and in court. He swore that she was wearing nothing but a yellow negligee when he arrived at the cabin, but she was known to wear and be travelling with a pair of black pyjamas, and these were not found, and it was concluded that she must have been wearing these when she was pushed through the porthole. If you're having consensual sex, you're unlikely to be wearing sort of your pyjamas fully on, I would have thought. I'm speculating, obviously, but so if she's in her pyjamas, it seems more likely that she wasn't open to his advances. The fact that there was no evidence against Cam made it look like he had a possibility of getting off. The scratches on his shoulders and arms were deemed by the ship's doctors to be caused by a woman defending herself and not suffering from a fit. But without a body, they're unable to clarify if they're even linked to Gay Gibson. And he would be confident of knowing that, even if he was fairly happy to let people know that he did it. He knows that there's no way that this can necessarily be linked. There's no body. There's no witness. Stains on the pillow in the cabin were confirmed by well-known pathologist Dr. Donald Tare to be blood stains of the blood type O. Now, since Cam's blood was type A, it could be assumed that this was the blood from Gay Gibson, not his from the scratches. Dr. Tare stated that these stains, along with emissions of urine, could be expected from someone who'd been strangled to death. Emissions that would not stem from someone having a heart attack. And this piece of evidence, the piece of evidence that sealed the deal, was when Dr. Frederick Hocking took the stand, and he had examined cabin 126 and had found the sheets to be stained with urine. And he went on to explain to the court that loss of bladder control is common during strangulation. I would say I think it would also be common during fits or certain other medical emergencies, but it was pointed out in court that if it had occurred during sex, then the urine would be on Cam and not on the sheets. So again, I disagree, depending on what position you're in having sex. If she had lost control of her bladder, I would still expect to see some on the sheets. I don't know if you know this, but I'm not in forensics, so let's take everything I think with a pinch of salt. I disagree with this. Also, it's 1947, and I'm watching CSI from 2000, and I read a lot of books by people who are working now, so the changes are huge. So I disagree with this as being definitive, but it's enough for the jury. They take just 45 minutes to find Cam guilty of murder, and he's sentenced to death. He would be hanged at Winchester Prison. But he cheats the gallows. The House of Commons added an amendment to the new Criminal Justice Bill before Parliament, one which would abolish capital punishment. The Home Secretary, while this bill was being debated, through the House of Lords, and the House of Lords would later reject this, but while it was being debated, the Home Secretary commuted all capital sentences to life terms, and Cam was one of those who probably got away with murder, and therefore cheated the gallows by this really brief legal loophole. It was after his sentence was commuted that several women came forward to tell how Cam had sexually attacked them on previous voyages on the Durban Castle, two of them claiming that they had been raped. Another woman said that she had been attacked on deck by Cam, who dragged her into a tool room where she fought desperately as he tried to strip her clothes off. He then lost patience and strangled her until she lost consciousness, and she then regained consciousness and said he was standing over her grinning. In September 1959, Cam was released on parole. He changed his name to Clark, and he got a job as a waiter. In May 1967, so 8 years later, he was convicted of offences against schoolgirls, specifically an attack on a 13-year-old girl. But he didn't get locked up for this. He just had his parole extended. He was actually sent back to prison for the remainder of his original sentence when he was charged with sexual misconduct with 3 schoolgirls while working as a head waiter in Scotland. He was released in 1978, still protesting his innocence, and died a year later from heart failure. We'll never know exactly what happened to Gay Gibson. All we know is how she spent her last evening, dancing with friends, and then sometime in the early hours of the 18th of October 1947, 90 miles off the coast of Portuguese Guinea, she was pushed through a porthole into the ocean, perhaps alive, perhaps dead. Her body was never recovered. Cam never confessed or told the actual story. The story he did tell changed so often none of it can be believed. It's thought that Cam went to her cabin with the idea of seducing her. She resisted him. He strangled her. She died, hopefully. Which sounds a weird thing to say, and then he put her through the porthole, mistakenly believing that without the presence of a body, he would avoid prosecution for murder. Though, obviously, as we know, this is not the case. Did Gibson frantically press both bells while being attacked by Cam? I believe probably she did. If she died of natural causes, as he'd said, and then been put through the porthole, why were these buttons pressed? He admits that he didn't press them. And if they were having consensual sex and then she has either a fit or heart failure or anything like that, she didn't press the buttons and he didn't notice her pressing the buttons. Where did the blood on the linen come from? There are so many unanswered questions with this, and there are some actresses and actors who didn't come back for the trial who believed that she did die of natural causes. They'd seen her having fits, they'd seen her frothing at the mouth, and they thought this innocent man has been wrongly convicted, but I don't think so. I think that it's too coincidental that he was a sexual predator before and a sexual predator afterwards, and yet somehow this was a consensual liaison that went wrong through no fault of his. Obviously, we don't know whether the woman who came forward, who said that he had strangled her until she passed out, was telling the truth. I would like to believe that she was, especially at that time when, for a woman to come forward and tell a story of this happening would reflect on her almost more than the man, even a convicted criminal. So I believe that he is responsible. He was responsible for the death of Gay Gibson. I think the whole thing is very tragic. Her family never knew for sure, and by all accounts, at least 6 schoolgirls were molested in some way by him, having been let out of prison on parole. And that is the story of the Porthole Murder. I'd love to know what you think. Send me a message. I hope you're all having a lovely summer. You can email me themondaynightrevue@gmail.com. You can find me on social media at The Monday Night Review on TikTok, Instagram and Facebook. You can check out the Patreon where there's loads. There's a whole library now of extra episodes. Every week, Holly writes a really lovely, it's lovely. It's beautifully written. They're not always lovely. Spooky tale, paranormal goings on, true crime stories. So you can sit down with a cup of tea and read that. And until next time, be kind, stay safe, and always check the back seat before you drive.